Hello and welcome to Ask a CFO, the podcast series that shines a light on the unique path taken to become Chief Financial Officer. I'm Sophie Jackson, and in this episode, we speak with Han Leong, former CFO of AEM Holdings Limited. Han is a seasoned international finance executive who has previously served as the CFO of 3 listed companies on the Singapore Stock Exchange. With decades of leader experience across Fortune 200 multinationals across Singapore, Hong Kong, China and Europe, Han now provides business consulting and advisory services to business owners and to startups, helping them navigate from capital strategy to business transformation. This gives her a vast understanding of the role, and I'm very excited to share her insights with you all. So first of all, can I ask you to introduce yourself for me?
So most people call me Han. I have a Chinese name known as Jiasu Han, very much born and raised in Singapore, which is a very small, vibrant and multicultural city-state. I've worked over 30 years in various geographies, in Singapore, in China, in Hong Kong, and in Europe, etc., and in various multi-industries. That's very much where I am in terms of careers in international settings.
Amazing. And then I wondered if you could tell me, if you could recall your earliest memory of thinking that you wanted to go into the career that you went into.
Hey, that's really a good question. Because when I thought about myself, what attracted me to finance actually is a very simple answer. What I did was, when I was selecting the course or degree to pursue after my A-levels, my criteria was so basic and simple. I wanted to pursue a degree that would basically lead to a professional qualification in the shortest amount of time. So the degree of accountancy fits the bill. It's very much a 3-year course leading to a professional qualification. And of course, one would have to be subsequently a chartered accountant or a certified accountant with some continuous professional education post-graduation. At that stage in life, I was very keen to see the world and also leaving exams and the library as soon as practical. So choosing the accountancy degree was a very easy decision for me as a teenager going to university. And as I completed my degree course, my early years of external audit exposure in a Big Four was very intriguing for me because I observed that finance is an intersection for decision-making, also for operations and performance. I mean, I was given financial statements, and financial statements basically is the draw matter for me to conduct a finance career. I was able to see finance numbers that basically connect the dots of operational strategic decisions to financial performance. So it felt like finance gave me the blueprint of a business. And I was curious about understanding business and what transpired beneath those numbers. So that's really how I got attracted to finance and continue and pursue a career in finance subsequently to the university degree.
Amazing. And you mentioned at the beginning that you grew up in Singapore. Tell me a little bit about your early experiences there and the people that kind of shaped you as you were growing up.
Well, I think during the time that I was growing up, we don't have things like computer games, right, or digital social media. So I was spending a lot of time playing in terms of sports and school committees. So sports and teamwork very much a large part of my living days. I would say that I devote more time in sports and school committees than the studies itself. So the environment shaped my values very much because it instilled elements of resilience, adaptability, and also curiosity. So as I subsequently progressed in my career and moved into different settings, international settings outside Singapore, I feel that those early principles give me the anchor for respect for diversity, having come from a small country, a small nation like Singapore, and also gives me the anchor for adaptability as I work through cross-cultural teams and subsequently managing complex stakeholder environments.
Amazing. And you mentioned 3 themes there that I think are the standout factors for all of us right now as we navigate so many changes and so on. It's really resilience, as you said, adaptability and curiosity. And one of the things I find interesting about Singapore is something you've touched on there. the kind of rapid rate of evolution of what Singapore means and represents. And as you well said, that it's kind of cross-cultural melting pot means that for such a small place, you can experience such a vast array of different backgrounds and life experiences amongst the people there, which is phenomenally unique, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really a melting pot for multinational companies and also obviously small, medium enterprises, which could be founder-led or which could be family-led offices. So that diversity of economics in terms of how businesses are set up gives us a lot of that diversity in terms of depth and as well as breadth of managing different stakeholders and managing different businesses. So I've benefited tremendously from that opportunity of seeing that diversity.
Amazing. And we're here to talk about, the journey to CFO. But before we kind of start into a bit of your background, I wanted to ask you, what do you think makes for a great CFO?
I believe a great CFO is a business co-pilot. This is very important. One, which is I would emphasize very significantly, is also about articulating the company's story. The CFO possesses information in terms of data, and data are very fact-checked, fact-based information. So data outlines performances, outlines also the thoughts around a strategy and the execution behind it. So I think what will make a CFO stand out above the peers is really what the CFO considers from a fact-based information, articulating that company story and keeping it calm and articulating to stakeholders. And stakeholders will be multifold in the sense of internal employees, the investor community, the board, and obviously regulators. That will be the key elements of what the CFO would do beyond the roles of the traditional finance tasks, which are, say, FP&A, controls compliance framework.
Excellent. And I mean, as I mentioned there, we're going to be exploring a little bit your unique path to become a CFO. So you had a background in treasury at Philips, and I know that was a key step on your career journey and has played a role in your development. How do you think that experience that you had there working in treasury at Philips prepared you for your first CFO role?
I really enjoy my time in Philips Treasury. Thanks for the question, because it's a good question and it brings me memorable experience. It transpired more than 2 decades ago. In Philips Treasury, I had 5 finance treasury roles. I was working across various geographies: Europe, China, Hong Kong, and obviously Singapore. It actually started with Philips in Singapore. I was also the treasury leader for Philips in a joint venture, which is headquartered in Hong Kong. And then I had some things in the Amsterdam headquarters as well. So I think my time at Philips Treasury was more like, I would say, a ninja training phase. Well, you're not in CFO seat, because I was not a CFO then until much later in one of the business unit. But you're very much in the, you're deep in the engine room. You look very elbows deep in cash flow, obviously, because that's what a treasurer would be looking very acutely into. Funding structures, foreign exchange risk, cash management, etc. So it's beyond more than just a technical jargon or technical word that a lot of treasurers use, but treasury teaches how to value creation and how to preserve that, how to structure deals that work, to manage liquidity through good times and bad. And also it gives me that very crucial training, which is invisible leadership. Ultimately, in treasury, you're influencing without having the title, because you've been nudging business unit to follow policies, organizing different priorities across market, keeping people calm when foreign exchange markets becomes very irrational, and also managing and standardizing treasury across, at least for me, during my China stint, over 30 entities across China, centralizing cash, managing foreign exchange, setting up pool structures. So these are very soft skills, I would say, because it's about negotiation, alignment, and touching diplomacy, which was very useful when I spoke to the CEO and COO subsequently at a C-suite table. So when I really stepped into my first CFO role, I didn't really feel that I was stepping into unknown. Granted, I had a lot to learn, but thanks to those treasury years, I was able to know what's the essential things, really keeping financially sound while steering towards strategic goals. And also the portable skill sets that I would always be able to pull out of the sleeve when I'm managing as a CFO.
Excellent. Yeah, I think it's fascinating. And I think there's such different flavors to the kind of niche of finance that you cut your teeth in. So thank you for sharing that. You and I have something in common in that we've both spent a lot of our careers working overseas. And I think it's something that makes for a challenging and very rewarding experience at the same time. I think it can be in one experience, some of the most difficult and some of the most triumphant moments. And it's a much more extreme approach to developing, I think, on a personal and a professional level. So tell me, I know you've spent over a decade working internationally. Do you think that working abroad has been good for your career advancements? And for those considering it, what do you think there are some of the challenges that you've faced whilst working abroad? Let's kind of start off there.
Well, actually, I see more draw attraction to it than challenges because I feel that working internationally was maybe one of the most transformative times of my career. I mean, I was living in developing markets. I was also working in developed markets, and other than in Singapore, which I was totally obviously familiar with. I feel that those relocations also give me the direct immersions into new ways of thinking with my local colleagues and also tested me to be resilient, culturally sensitive, also building on cultural interactions. It ultimately, all this will expand into problem solving as I see through challenges through different lenses. From a technical standpoint, maybe international experience will bring in like, okay, I need to figure out new regulatory complexity, let's say for finance, because finance or tax, you tend to have a lot more regulatory information that you need to digest and be able to internalize. But I feel that these are mental challenges that basically sharpen me, my adaptability, my learning skills. So in essence, I see it more a catalyst for me than a challenge because challenges are meant to be a part of problem solving, right? I mean, there will be challenges regardless of where one stays, but it's more about really seeing things through a different pair of lenses at different points in time. And I feel that is definitely formative for me.
Amazing. Yeah, and I totally agree with you. I mean, transformative is a brilliant way to put it. I would say that, I mean, obviously there are moments in your life when you are more or less able to have the bandwidth to move to a totally different culture and set yourself up for personal as well as professional reasons. So I think choosing the right moment to move abroad is very important as well. And I also think doing it as young as possible can be good as well because you have less to lose.
Yeah, I totally agree with. And I had also the benefit of learning new things, right? Well, I picked up some Shanghainese local dialect when I was living in China. I mean, you don't have to if you don't want to, because most people will speak Chinese, Mandarin as the first language. But it makes me able to communicate with a lot of people who would otherwise probably not have like an interest to talk to me if I'm just speaking in Chinese. So I thought that was quite good for me because it tests me to learn something else. Okay, can I learn something conversational Shanghainese in that case, or maybe very conversational Dutch in that case? So I thought it was very good opportunity for me to test a different aspect of my brain. So I totally enjoyed challenging my mind to pick up different things.
And I think that's such a good point that you make there, because when I look back on my experiences, that you can be an expat, and that I ascribe as more of a personality than an actual term, or you can be somebody who's moving to a new culture and experiencing it. And those are two different levels that have different rewards for them, right? And that curiosity and open-mindedness and open-heartedness when you're embracing a new culture adds such an element of wonder to that experience, I think. And then you can have different cultural experiences within the workplace as well, because you can connect with people on a much deeper level. I mean, I think because my native tongue is English, there's always the option to be lazy when you move somewhere because you don't need necessarily to learn a new language or really try and absorb yourself in a new culture. But the moments when you do, I think are so rewarding and yeah, stay with you forever. So let's come back to think about your experiences as CFO. So I think one of the things that I find interesting in these conversations is to think about preconceptions that we have about the role. So tell me, when you first stepped into your first CFO role, what aspects of the role were aligned with your expectations? And were there any elements of the job that took you by surprise, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are some so-called preconceived notions about the CFO role, and I'll admit I had some of them before I stepped into that seat. I expected myself to be quite heavily, if not very heavily, involved in financial planning, compliance, capital structure. I mean, the traditional pillars of the CFO role. And that did hold true. But more so, I found myself actually at the table for M&A, divestment, digital transformation, even preparing for customers' meeting before the sales team presents themselves with a major customer meeting. And even in recent years, more on ESG discussion and strategy. So I felt that what came out really strong was really I was in a seat that basically had the ability to see everything that happens in the company, everything that matters, because every decision, every strategy, every operational execution would have a financial impact. So the scope was far broader than just finance that I had was as a preconception about what a CFO is. And that for me was really quite interesting because I felt that, hey, I wasn't just a person ensuring financial rigor. I'm also bridging between numbers, strategy, between internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, especially at investor relations call, results briefing, roadshows, analyst discussions. So I constantly switch lenses, whether it's very operational detail information or looking at high level vision, or often even within the same meeting. So that is very emotional demand the role requires. But what I enjoy is no longer just about looking at numbers. It's just about how important to be thoughtful, consistent, and transparent in communicating. That to me is what I have found myself to be involved with in that journey. And the technical side of the job more familiar. But this is the most interesting part about really knowing the business and dissecting the business, like peeling the onions, for the lack of a better word. One layer, one layer, one layer over time.
Amazing. And I love that you've also mentioned, the importance of communication, because I think the ability to create narratives that are comprehensible and galvanize a whole organization behind you is also so important, right?
Yes, absolutely. Especially some of the roles that I took up, having that investors relationship conversations are quite important in shaping up the communicating, the articulating of the company story. So I felt that I had benefited a lot from the experience because then I switched not only my lenses, but also my thinking around what an external party will look at think about when they look at numbers and see whether the company walks the talk in terms of that strategy with the financial outcome.
Amazing. You've had various CFO roles. Tell me a little bit about some of those experiences and how you arrived at where you are in this moment in your life.
Um, well, to begin with, my CFO roles were pretty diverse across different industries. So I have moved between industries from oil and gas to consumer electronics to technology, also covering different regions. Some are more Southeast Asia centric, some are Middle East, some are China, US, and Europe. All these roles require lots of, I guess, what any C-level executives would do, problem solving, being agile, and also being future oriented in terms of how to build a business and to be sustainable. I would say that each move I made is built upon the last, and it's always about learning to grow personally from living through uncertainty, especially in today's context, and as well as the complexity and change. So every role for me is a new to my toolkit. If I really look at my first CFO role was with a listed company in Singapore called Rotary Engineering, subsequently delisted it. It is a company that has is largely in oil and gas infrastructure services and serves the oil and gas companies like the ExxonMobil, the Shell equivalent, and the Middle East oil companies, with footprints largely in oil-centric geographies. So the opportunity for me was really the company had a mix of shareholders, sovereign fund, and founder. So that gives me the opportunity to navigate lots of boardroom dynamics, walk through organizational changes, and eventually delisting the company, which was one of the milestones that I have completed for the company. So I get lots of opportunities to learn new culture and working with different experiences. So I totally enjoyed that hands-on approach towards embracing changes within the organization.
Excellent. And, curiosity has come up a couple of times in our conversation. And I think in every conversation that I'm privileged enough to have with CFOs across the world, I think it's something that was a little bit overlooked as a skill set until the last few years. Why do you think curiosity is so important? And how can financial professionals seeking to be leaders use it to their advantage?
Well, I think we do not know what we do not know, right? Most of the time as a human being. So if we are curious, then we want to know what we do not know. So I think therefore, if one is curious, one will want to understand more or a bigger picture or what beyond the status quo, beyond what the numbers say, and looking beyond and what's behind the whole scheme of matter. Dig deeper, look beyond spreadsheets, look beyond just what ERP system pushes. And also being curious actually builds strong partnership across the organization because then I engage my other C-level executives to understand the business better. I get invited to conversations too. And that gives it a very compelling element because I noticed when I was working through with a lot of the other leadership team members, they are very keen to share information, but they're probably sharing information from a certain pair of lenses. And when a finance person comes in and connect the dots together, the execution of the operations team or the technology team into financial data, then in connecting the dots, I felt that there is a lot of camaraderie that you can see from the other non-finance colleagues, and that engages a lot of engagement. So I felt that was also one way for me to stay connected, especially with non-finance individuals who really appreciate simplicity, the complex matters. So I absolutely think curiosity makes the job a lot more fun, and it also engages your internal customers.
Yeah, I think you're so correct. I mean, I learned in my 20s that when you have a conflict, you can't be curious and defensive at the same time. And so that kind of open mind approach to where other people are coming from in organizations is such a critical skill in communication. And I think as everybody's role is facing great evolutions and we're against a backdrop of more uncertainty than ever, being curious will allow professionals to not be defensive as perhaps their role needs to evolve, as perhaps their organization is evolving, and as perhaps, the very world around us is changing too. I think it's such a critical skill set for those who want to thrive in times of change.
Yeah, and especially in recent times, we really see what are the key things that are taking the center stage. It's about ESG, it's about AI, geopolitics, right? And nobody has really gone through this because these are very new topics, right? So it's about being curious and walking through the journey together. It's just like COVID times as well. I mean, nobody knows how to handle COVID because there's no textbook study for that. You just have to figure out, be curious about how to be practical and deploy methods that make sense during periods of uncertainty, during periods of changes. And I think just being curious would be the most relevant. It doesn't have to be the smartest person in the room, but the person with the most curiosity would, together with the team, be able to excel beyond that, just focusing on technical excellence or technical competence.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned there, particularly I think when it comes to implementation of AI, it needs a kind of a curious, innovative mindset in order to come up with use cases and to see what the impact can be. We need to have an open mind because, as you say, there is no textbook. And I know that financial professionals have a background in certainty and formulaic approaches, but the two married together are what will separate leaders from followers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Just normally I will ask myself, the what if and the so what question. That helps me internalize, is it practical? Is it workable? Does it make sense? So I tend to ask myself that question a lot of with my ideas and also with ideas that they will presented to me. The what if and the so what questions.
Amazing. And we've also, I mean, the curiosity is one part of being a great leader. The other that's come up many times for us is this ability to communicate strongly, which you have mentioned frequently as one of the skill sets involved in being a leading CFO. For those who want to master this ability to communicate well and to be able to articulate the company's story, what are some of the skills that you think financial professionals can develop? Because I think that's something that maybe earlier on in your career is not so necessary and later on becomes more and more critical. So what advice would you offer those who want to master this strength?
One of the things, and I have also seen myself at times in that situation, is as finance practitioners, we need to really translate complexity into simplicity. Sometimes finance people tend to speak finance jargon. So we need to be very comfortable to really humanize the language to what matters most to the audience, because otherwise we lose the audience. And finance likes to throw data. So we need to use data to paint the picture. So when it comes to articulating a company story, it's not just to report, but actually is to engage and lead, which means equivalent of influence, to influence the outcome. So I honestly believe good company story is not just for external stakeholders too, right? Because sometimes we have a lot of internal town hall meeting, internal teams as well, especially when you're a listed company. Every time after quarterly results to the external public, you also tell your internal stakeholders, your employees, what does the company do? How does their work connect to the bigger picture, which I think is very important. So that's when, as finance communicate, we should really become business partners or co-pilots of the business. So not just number crunching. So while we have the data, I think that's great. We need to translate that storytelling or articulating the company story into actions, into decisions taken, and into what people will buy in terms of vision. And when finance can do that, that would be very much leading to true business partnership.
Thank you so much for that. Everybody's role has evolved a lot in recent times. The CFO role, I think, as much as there is talk around how much it's changing, there are elements that remain the same and essential. What are some of the most notable changes you've seen to the function, and what do you see as the driving forces behind any transformations?
I'll talk about the transformation first, because the transformation is noticeable to everybody, finance and non-finance. I mean, the transformation that have really taken place is driven by a few things that we have all seen: technology, globalization, and again, I'm saying the same thing, ESG, because I have never seen so much ESG discussions until the recent years. ESG didn't used to be so much corporate ownership until the really recent years. And that also pushed finance to take very holistic view of value creation. I mean, the E, the S, and the G. So that basically, I have spent a lot more time on the ESG elements of it, and also technology, because the automation of some of the finance tasks and then freeing up for time for higher value creation work, and how to basically staff resources towards business partnership roles. So that to me was the essence of the change and transformation. And the evolution of it, if we do see, is no longer really like what the traditional role is about, which is reporting, explaining what has happened last quarter, explaining what happened last year versus year. But now it's much more about anticipation, about what's coming next, and really changing the direction of the business. The conversations are now very much data-driven, in my perspective, and finance is asked for insight because using the data of the past to drive into insight forward-looking to change market dynamics or at least influence dynamics in competitive positioning. So I feel that the roles are so much more encompassing, all business partnership. This when I first started out, where the matters were more centered towards compliance, financial reporting, tax, etc. Yeah.
Amazing. And then what advice can you offer to those who aspire to reach that role?
I'm not sure everybody who started a finance career planned to be a CFO. It's Well, I think it's not the destination is not the focus, but it's about building that bandwidth, building that range that I think is important. And sometimes I would say even stepping away from a finance role could be equally rewarding. I did a role when I was in a US MNC, which is more towards a business partnership, business development with some customer front-facing role. That to me was very different role. I didn't have to take care of P&L totally during that role, but it gives me a different perspective of really understanding what customer engagement is, what the customers were thinking, and then stepping into the shoes of how can I help customer benefit, and yet also at the same time they will buy our services. So I felt that was a very good path for me, that short stint of being away from direct finance role to do something else, going into a different zone that one may not be familiar with, but can be tested, and then figuring out how to be in a position to be comfortable. So I think that they will be great building in terms of finance, in terms of book depth, and as well as breadth in the business. So for anyone, I will just really say, just have to stay curious, which we discussed earlier, stay adaptable, because changes are always happening. Business world keeps changing, and the CFO will evolve with changes as well, as we have seen. And by doing that, then that's really being a co-pilot to the CEO and the other C-suite members at the table.
Amazing. And then my final question for you is around once you've reached that role. We've been fortunate enough to interview CFOs past and present, and some of them have spoken to me about the journey afterwards. So tell me, what's your advice for those thinking beyond the role?
Well, some would have pursued a different role. Being a finance person, the next chart for some is continue being a CFO, which is then therefore being very, very finance driven, or being in a role that is more operational, a CEO role or COO role. I think they are both very good roles, because to be a good CEO coming from a CFO role, that's basically enhancing that level of execution in terms of rallying people around to support the business strategy towards execution and making it happen. And I feel that most CFOs would be in the position to be in that role, to be a CEO or COO equivalent. It's just whether the affinity interests the individuals. But all in all, I think whether the roles are to whichever C-suite positions, it's all about problem solving. It's also just about looking to be calm and confident in decision making, and making decision based on fast informed decision. So I would say that that's some of the roles that I've seen some of my peers join and get into, and they are obviously equally rewarding for different people, different career aspirations.
Amazing. Is there anything else you want to share with our community before we wrap up today's amazing conversation?
I was just saying that the CFO role has really evolved from being really the numbers person to being a strategic co-pilot. And that's true. That's really true. A lot of transformation, sustainability, managing stakeholder trust, and also shaping business model. So it's still back to finance person. The focus will be problem solving, and problem solving is not just, it is never about just problem solving at finance level, but problem solving through different facets of operations through the business. And that's what really keeps finance roles very exciting, because that evolution will always be constantly changing. or the bar could be raised higher, could be raised different. And that's where I think the CFO could be a chief insights officer, getting insights from business data, from data, etc. So I think the finance is really an interesting roles to be in, and I hope people continue to have the aspirations to seek finance as a career.
Amazing. Well, all that's left for me just to say is thank you so much for being part of the Ask a CFO community, for lending the wisdom of your experiences with everybody, and for sharing your journey. Thank you ever so much. I've loved speaking with you.
Hey, thanks, Sophie. It's good to speak to you, and thanks for having me in this discussion.
A very big thank you again to Han for taking part in our Ask a CFO series. Please do subscribe and share any episodes you found relevant, and stay tuned for the next episodes in our series as we continue to share the personal journeys and professional experiences of current and former CFOs across the world.